The producer's finger hit Dean Martin's chest, like a period at the end of a sentence. Hard, deliberate, final. And from inside dressing room 4 came the sound of Judy Garland's voice, scraping against the walls, saying, "I'm going out there," saying it the way people say things when they're not sure their legs will cooperate, but their mouth has already committed. Wait, because Dean's next 60 seconds in that corridor didn't look like heroism. It didn't feel like a decision. It felt like a man standing very still while two different versions of his life pulled at him from opposite directions. And what he chose in that stillness was something nobody in that building expected, least of all Dean himself. It was a Thursday in October of 1963, and the CBS Television City complex in Hollywood hummed with the specific anxious energy of a live broadcast counting down. Studio 43 had been reconfigured twice that week. The set designers had argued about the sightlines. The lighting director had burned through 2 rigs, trying to find the right warmth for Judy's face, and the orchestra under musical director Mel Torme's careful hand had been rehearsing since noon. The show was already in trouble. Everyone on the lot knew it, the way everyone on a ship knows when the hull has taken on water, quietly, without anyone making an announcement. The ratings for the first 3 weeks had come in below projections. The network had sent a memo that used words like recalibrate and demographic concerns, and Judy's team had been walking on the edge of something brittle for days. Dean had arrived at 2 in the afternoon, which was late for him. He preferred to slide in close to taping, greet the right people, find his mark, and let the work happen. He had his own tuxedo, his own pocket square, a rhythm that had carried him through 100 stages and twice that many television cameras. He was not nervous. Dean Martin was constitutionally incapable of appearing nervous in a professional setting, and on most nights, that was the truth, not a performance. He signed the guest contract, did one walkthrough with the floor manager, a compact man named Richie Arnetti, who smelled of cigarettes and kept a clipboard pressed to his sternum like a shield. Richie showed Dean his entrance point, the camera blocking for the duet, the placement of the second microphone stand. Standard work, the kind Dean could do in his sleep. He was in the green room, drinking coffee that was too hot, and reading a newspaper that was 2 days old, when Richie came back with a different kind of expression, not the clipboard expression, something flatter. "Judy's having a time of it," Richie said, which in that building at that hour meant something specific and serious. Notice how Dean didn't ask what kind of time. He already knew. He'd worked with Judy before, not in this format, but in rooms where she was present. And Judy Garland's presence was one of those things that occupied space differently than other people's presence. She was either filling the room completely, every molecule of air converted to performance and electricity, or she was somewhere smaller than the room, pulled back behind her own eyes in a way that made people look at the floor rather than at her. There was very little middle ground with Judy. He folded his newspaper. He set down his coffee. He said, "Where is she?" Richie hesitated, which was its own kind of answer. The corridor outside the dressing rooms was long and fluorescent, the kind of light that flattened everything. The doors were numbered in brass, and number 4 was at the far end, slightly ajar, the way a door is when someone has come through it in a hurry and the latch hasn't caught. Dean could hear voices, a woman's voice, higher and more controlled. That would have been Judy's personal assistant, a redhead named Carol, who had been with her for 3 years. And under that, below it, coming up through the floor somehow, Judy's own voice, not performing, not projecting, just talking to itself in that frequency people use when they're trying to convince themselves. He was 15 feet from the door when the other voice arrived. Marcus Webb came out of a side office, moving fast, the way television executives moved when something had gone off script, not running, because running in a corridor signaled panic to anyone watching, but walking at the precise speed that communicated authority without acknowledging urgency. He was the supervising producer on The Garland Show, 38 years old, CBS bred from the ground up. A man who wore his network loyalty the way other men wore wedding rings. He had a good suit, dark gray, and a face that had learned to communicate very little. He saw Dean at the same moment. Dean saw him, and he recalibrated mid-stride, arriving in front of Dean with his shoulders already set. "Good timing," Marcus said, and he said it the way people say things when they mean the opposite. "I was about to send someone for you." "How bad is it?" Dean said. Marcus looked down the corridor, toward room 4, then back. He kept his voice even, professional, the voice of a man discussing a production problem, which is precisely how he was framing it in his own mind. "He's not going to be able to go on. We've got 14 minutes, and she cannot stand up straight. I'm going to make the call now, delay the taping, get a recorded segment in as fill. We'll reschedule." "Has she been told?" "Carol's in there. She knows the situation." Dean looked at the door. From inside came a sound that was not crying, not quite. It was the sound someone makes when they are fighting crying, with everything available to them. Breath held against breath, will held against chemistry. "Let me go in," Dean said. And this is the moment Marcus Webb put his finger on Dean Martin's chest. Not aggressively, not quite. It was the gesture of a man who believed he was being reasonable, who believed he was protecting something, who believed that what he was about to say was simply the professional calculus of the situation and not a choice about what mattered. The finger landed on the lapel of Dean's tuxedo, and Marcus said, "I need you to hear me. If you go in that room and she decides to try and go on, and something happens out there, on camera, live, in front of however many million people are watching, your name is in that story. You're the man who pushed her onto the stage. You're the man who didn't stop it. That's not a story you want." Look at what Marcus is actually saying. He's not wrong, technically. He is describing a real risk with reasonable precision. He's also describing it as though Dean's career is the primary variable in the equation, as though the person on the floor, in room 4, is a liability to be managed rather than a human being in distress. And he is doing this because, in his framework, network television, rating points, sponsor relationships, liability exposure, that's what she is. Not cruelly, just practically. Just the way that world worked in 1963, in that building, under those fluorescent lights. Dean looked at the finger on his lapel. He looked at it for a long time. "Take that off me," he said. His voice was quiet, not threatening, not theatrical, not performing the way he sometimes performed his serious moments, because he'd learned that performance was often more effective than sincerity in rooms like this. It was just quiet. Slat, the voice he used when he meant exactly what he said, and nothing around it. Marcus removed his finger. He took a half step back. Dean said, "You're worried about what happens if she goes out there and falls apart. I get it. That's your job." He paused. "But I'm going in that room because she's in there by herself, except for Carol. And she's been in a lot of rooms by herself her whole life, and I'm not going to stand in a corridor. 14 minutes before showtime pretending I don't know that." He went through the door. Stop for a second and hold this moment, because what you need to understand about Dean Martin in 1963 is that he was not a man who made grand gestures. He was not Frank Sinatra, who could turn a moment into a manifesto and make you feel the history of it while it was happening. Dean's relationship to sentiment was complicated. He had built a career partially on the pretense of not caring too much, on the image of the man who everything rolled off of, the man with the drink and the easy laugh, and the certainty that nothing was worth ruining a perfectly good evening over. It was a performance, as all public personas are performances, but it was a performance that had settled into him over the years and become part of the architecture of how he moved through the world. When he chose to step outside it, it meant something different precisely because it happened so rarely. The room was smaller than the corridor had prepared him for. There was a vanity table, with the lights on around the mirror, half of them burned out, the working ones casting a clinical brightness. Carol was crouched near the window, not quite touching Judy's arm, maintaining the careful physical distance of someone who knows that touch can either help or become the last thing before everything goes sideways. Judy was on the floor beside the vanity chair, one hand gripping the chair's leg, the other pressed flat on the linoleum. She was in her performance dress, the green one with the beadwork at the collar, and her hair was done, and her makeup was done, and the rest of her was somewhere that the hair and makeup hadn't reached. She looked up when Dean came in. Her eyes were very dark and very tired, and for a second they didn't register anything. And then they registered him, and something shifted. Not relief, not quite, but recognition. "Dean," she said. Just his name. "Hey, sweetheart," he said. He crossed the room and sat down on the floor beside her, not crouching, not bending. He sat down on the linoleum in his tuxedo, his back against the vanity, his legs stretched in front of him, as though this was a perfectly normal place to be. 14 minutes before a live television broadcast. Carol looked at him with an expression that contained equal parts gratitude and bewilderment. Judy said, "You're going to ruin your suit." "I've got another one," Dean said. She almost laughed. It wasn't quite a laugh. It was the shape of one, the gesture toward one, but it moved through her and her breathing changed a little, and the hand on the chair leg loosened slightly. "I can't," she said. "I went to stand up before and my knees just..." She stopped. She looked at the floor. "It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing in front of you." "Dean, you know what's embarrassing," Dean said. "In 1952, I walked out in front of an audience in Miami and completely blanked on the third verse of a song I'd been singing for 4 years. Stood there for what felt like 45 minutes, was probably 8 seconds. I looked at the piano player and I said," he lowered his voice and his Italian came out a little, the Steubenville in him. I said, "Tony, what comes next?" And Tony played the opening bars of Happy Birthday. Judy did laugh this time. A real one. Small, surprised out of her. "What did you do?" "I sang Happy Birthday to the whole front row," Dean said. "Made up names. Told them it was a tradition." She laughed again, and this time it lasted longer, and when it wound down her eyes were wet, but her breathing was different. Slower. She was still on the floor, but she was more present in the room than she'd been when he walked in. Listen, because what happened next is the part that never got described correctly in the years when people who were there that night talked about it. What Dean did was not a rousing speech. It was not inspiration. It was much smaller and much harder than that. He said, "You don't have to go out there tonight." She looked at him. "I mean it," he said. "You don't owe CBS a performance. You don't owe 40 million people anything tonight. If you want to stay in this room, I'll stay in this room with you. I'll tell them we're both unavailable, and we'll eat whatever food they have back here. And you can tell me why your lighting director keeps burning out rigs." Judy was quiet for a long moment. Carol, still near the window, had gone very still. "And if I want to go out?" Judy said. "Then we'll go out," Dean said. "Together. And if something goes sideways, I'm right there. And it goes sideways with me next to you, and the camera will have to figure out what to do with both of us." "Marcus is going to lose his mind," Judy said. "Marcus already lost it," Dean said. "Doesn't seem to have slowed him down much." Judy looked down at her dress, at the beadwork, at her hands. She was taking inventory of herself in the way people do when they're trying to determine if the sum of the parts can hold together for what's being asked of them. One breath, another. Her hand moved from the chair leg to the floor and pressed there. And then she looked at Dean. "Help me up," she said. He helped her up. It wasn't graceful. She was unsteady when she first got to her feet, and Dean kept his hand at her elbow, not gripping, just there, a point of contact if she needed it. Carol was up immediately and handed Judy her glass of water, and Judy drank it and looked at herself in the mirror for a moment and said something very quiet to her reflection that neither Dean nor Carol heard. She reached for her lipstick. Marcus Webb was still in the corridor when they came out, and the expression on his face moved through several registers quickly. Surprise, calculation. Something that might have been relief, if relief had been filtered through extreme professional caution. He looked at Dean. He opened his mouth. Dean said, "She's ready. Are your cameras ready?" Marcus closed his mouth. He looked at Judy, who was standing straight now, who had put something on like a garment. The performance self-assembling around her, the way it did, the way it always had since she was a child. The show was the thing she knew how to do better than anything else in the world, and when she stepped into it, she became someone the floor could hold. 11 minutes, Marcus said finally. More than enough, Dean said. But watch what happened in Marcus's eyes in that moment, because it matters for what came later. He was looking at Dean with something that wasn't gratitude and wasn't anger. It was something more like accounting. A man adding up a column of figures and not liking the total. Marcus Webb was a network man, and network men in 1963 had long memories and longer grudges, and what Dean had done in the last 14 minutes had not been invisible. Dean had walked through Marcus's authority like it was a curtain, and the people in that corridor, Richie Arnetti, 2 camera operators, an assistant who'd been sent to find Dean 20 minutes ago, and had arrived just in time to see the whole thing. All of them had watched it happen. The show went on. Sensory detail here, because the studio floor deserved to be remembered. The smell of hot lighting rigs and hairspray and coffee from the craft table, the orchestra warming up one last time behind the curtain, the specific hush that a live broadcast set falls into in the 30 seconds before the floor director's hand comes down. The audience was seated, 400 people in rows, dressed up, excited, holding their programs. They didn't know what had happened in the corridor. They didn't know what was at stake. They knew only what the lights and the music and the curtain were about to give them. Judy came out first. She got the entrance. Applause she always got, because her audience loved her, with a specific ferocity that belonged to people who had grown up with her, who had watched her for decades, who felt her performances in a personal register. The applause hit her, and she absorbed it, and the transformation was visible, even from the wings, where Dean was standing watching. She became brighter, she became larger, she became Judy Garland in the way that was indistinguishable from magic, even when you knew what was underneath it. Dean came out on his cue, and the audience reacted. Big, warm, the specific delight of an unexpected favorite, and he hit his mark and smiled the smile that had always been one of the most convincing things about him. The smile that looked accidental and easy and entirely genuine. And he crossed to Judy, and they stood together at the center microphone, and the orchestra began. What they sang that night was a duet from the show's standard repertoire, something warm and swinging, a melody that moved between their voices like a conversation, Dean's low register moving under Judy's range. There was a moment, 2/3 of the way through, when the harmony landed exactly right, when their voices found that specific frequency that happens when two people are genuinely listening to each other, rather than merely sharing space, and the audience felt it. You could hear the shift in the room, the collective intake that isn't quite silence but is quieter than whatever came before. Judy looked at Dean in that moment. He looked back. Neither of them changed expression for the camera. Neither of them broke the performance, but something moved between them in that look that had nothing to do with the song. An acknowledgement, an accounting of the last hour, a kind of gratitude that was also something more complicated. Because Judy Garland had been helped many times in her life and had been hurt by most of the helping. And what Dean had given her in that room was not help in the usual sense, but something that had looked more like company. The song ended. The applause came up. Shotokan. Judy smiled at the camera. Dean bowed. Slight. Practiced. The floor director's hand moved. They cut to commercial. In the break, Dean found Carol near the monitor station and asked quietly how Judy was doing. Carol said, "She's okay. She's actually okay." She paused. "Thank you." She said it the way people say it when they're not sure the words are large enough for what they mean. The rest of the taping went smoothly. Judy was brilliant, which she often was, when she was also barely holding together. The two things coexisted in her in a way that was one of the genuine mysteries of performance. Dean did his numbers, did his banter, did the relaxed work that made audiences feel like they were watching something effortless, even when they were watching something that had been constructed piece by piece in the previous 14 minutes. Marcus Webb watched from the control room. He said nothing to Dean before Dean left that night. He signed the release, processed the talent payment, noted in his production report that the evening's taping had proceeded without incident, everything professional, everything correct. And somewhere in the neat columns of that professional correctness, a note that wasn't written down but was understood by everyone who had been in that corridor. The episode aired 3 weeks later. It got the best ratings the show had seen since the premiere. The network sent a memo that used the word encouraging. Nobody who watched it at home knew what had happened in the corridor of Studio 43 before it was made. And here is the other thread, the one that opened in that hallway and didn't close for a long time. Marcus Webb stayed at CBS. He moved slowly upward, in the way of men who were very good at institutional patience. He never spoke publicly about the Garland show or about Dean Martin. But the television industry in 1963 was a small world, and Marcus Webb moved through it for the next decade with his accounting intact. In 1973, a new television project Dean was developing went through preliminary stages, got to the network level, and then went quiet without clear explanation. He never knew for certain that Marcus Webb had been in the room when that decision was made, but he had his suspicions. What he did say, once, to someone he trusted, "That night cost me something later. I knew it would. When I walked through that door, didn't change anything." Remember that sentence, because it is the most precise thing Dean Martin ever said about the distance between who he appeared to be and who he actually was. The man who everything rolled off of, the man with the easy laugh and the drink and the certainty that nothing was worth ruining a good evening over. That man had walked through a dressing room door in October of 1963, fully aware that the corridor he was leaving behind contained a risk he was choosing not to manage. He sat down on the floor in his tuxedo. He told a story about a piano player named Tony. He helped her up. There is a quality of restraint that some performers understand, and almost none of them talk about. The knowledge that the biggest thing you can do in a moment is sometimes the smallest visible gesture. Dean Martin understood this in the way musicians understand rhythm, in the body, below the level of decision. He had been performing since he was a teenager in Steubenville, Ohio, working card tables and whatever room would have him. And the education he'd gotten in those rooms was not the education of applause. It was the education of watching what people needed and learning how to give them a version of it that didn't require them to ask. Judy Garland needed someone to sit with her on the floor. He sat with her on the floor. It sounds small. The show lasted 1 season. CBS canceled it in the spring of 1964. Citing ratings and internal production difficulties. Judy went on to other stages, other cities, other rooms where she was sometimes brilliant and sometimes barely present. Dean went on to other things too, movies, Las Vegas, a variety show of his own that would run for 9 seasons. Richie Arnetti, the floor manager with the clipboard, told a version of the dressing room story to his son years later. And the story moved the way stories do, slowly, incompletely, losing details at each telling. What got lost first was the silence in the room. When Dean sat down on the floor, what survived, as the essential core that couldn't be summarized away, was this: he came through the door when he didn't have to, and he sat with her, and he said she didn't have to go on, and she went on anyway. One look at the door, one choice in the corridor, one quiet sentence to the man with his finger on your chest. In a fluorescent corridor, with 14 minutes on the clock, and a man's finger on his lapel, Dean Martin stood still and let himself be exactly who he was. The floor held, the lights went on, and somewhere in the control room, Marcus Webb watched a monitor showing Judy Garland and Dean Martin sharing a microphone, their voices finding each other in a harmony that played like ease. And he wrote his production notes, and he kept his accounting, and Dean Martin sang like a man who had not just made a decision in a corridor that was going to cost him something, like a man with no weight on him at all, which was the best trick he ever pulled, and the one he pulled hardest on the nights it was most true. If you want to know what it sounded like when Dean and Judy's voices found that frequency in the second verse, what the audience heard from the inside of a room that didn't know what it had almost lost, tell me in the comments. There's another story that starts the night. The cameras came back on, and what Judy said to the orchestra conductor before she walked off stage. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think.